Amanda, I am very excited to talk to you. But when I say something like that, I always think it's such an ugly conversation. There's so much doom and gloom when we're talking about offshoring. And I'm not afraid of robotics as a concept or AI. That doesn't terrify me because I think that there are ways that can be integrated and it's a real benefit to our nation. However, I think that the picture that most people are not seeing is that while I focus a lot of my conversations on America First immigration, as I call it, we should just wipe out what we have, take it down to the concrete, and rebuild from the bottom up. Actually, first a moratorium, then do that. But H-1B is an issue, and I know that you just recently posted that everybody's focused on H-1B, and I completely agree with you. And what they're not paying attention to is offshoring. I'm 100% there. I think that that's strategic. They want to keep us talking about H-1B only and L-1 and OPT and all that. But I will say as a caveat here that the reason that is such a threat to the United States of America in the long term is that mass migration. Nobody comes in on F-1 student visas, then goes to OPT that doesn't expect to stay on H-1B and stay here for decades, if not their lifetime, drop a couple of babies. They're citizens, and it's a migration. It's not about getting the temporary job that it was intended for at the beginning. So I think that bothers people on a different scale because at least when you're offshoring, you're not changing your culture and dynamic and everything that makes America America. But we're not going to talk about H-1B, and we're not going to talk about all of that. I want to talk to you about offshoring. First, though, introduce my audience to what you do. You call yourself the job chick, not check. Sorry. You call yourself the job chick. So the word job is what intrigues me the most. Tell me, what do you do for a living?
Yeah. I am the job chick. I've been the job chick for the last 20 years. I really started my career focusing on careers for others, and I worked with a lot of executives over the years. I've helped over 25,000, find their next step and, resume writing, things like that. But as I started going through and as, I'm dealing with more leadership and executives, I started actually seeing what was going on in companies. And that's what made me go, wait a minute here. And I really started diving into it. So about 10 years ago, I would say, I really started looking at the mechanics of what's happening in the workforce and, looking at, workforce data and things like that. Now I run a financial firm, Insider Edge, and, we really focus on, what's happening with companies because the narrative that we're told and that they give in earnings calls is absolutely not, for the most part, what's happening, behind the scenes in the workforce. So it's stuff that I dive in because I have the background in actually understanding what people do, how companies operate, what executives are really thinking. I can actually look at it from a very different point of view than just a financial analyst or somebody like that. So, I have a lens on both sides. So I run that. I run Insider Edge Report, which is just all of the details of what's actually going on behind these nasty layoffs and what companies are doing. And I also, offer Insider Edge Live, where I go live twice a week just to talk about the behind the scenes and really discuss what I expect with the stock market. Because, at the end of the day, what we are seeing right now with a lot of the displacement that I know we're going to get into, especially for, U.S. workers, they're trying to figure out a way to make money. So, I at the stock market and go, hey, you know what? If they're going to play the game and they're going to lay you off and they're not going to hire Americans, then go make them work for you and become a shareholder. And, so I really focus on that side as well. So very broad scope, but I love it. I get to kind of really dive into what is happening. And that's all we want.
Well, you're very data driven. And
I am.
I really appreciate that. I don't understand half of your posts because I'm just my brain is not in the markets. I I focus on jobs. Whatever the numbers are, jobs, where are they? But I don't really, follow the stock market. I just see it every night when they report at the bell, if we're up or we're down, wherever. And GDP, whatever. Let me ask you a preliminary question that I've wanted to get the answer to for a long time. So this is it. My sense of things from my sort of relatively ignorant standpoint when it comes to markets and all that, is that the American people are trained by whomever to see the GDP and to see the stock market closing bell numbers up or down as really an indicator of the health of our economy. And ever since I began my deep dive into what is happening with the visa and immigration system and our jobs and offshoring, and I've assimilated just a lot of that without the background expertise that you would have, I've asked myself, why are those the numbers or the metrics that we're fed that say we're successful? Because it seems to me that if the GDP is growing, but it's really only helping multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporations and the top tier of those organizations, those companies, and if the stock markets are going up because the bottom line is the most important thing, and it doesn't matter how many people they lay off or how many people positions they offshore, that may not really be giving us an accurate picture of the health of our economy. And instead, my proposal, which is, again, uninformed, is should we be looking daily, weekly, and monthly at reports that say, this is how the middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class is growing or shrinking. This is what the average salary or household earnings are. This is how many families have to have mom working outside of the home when they've got 4 kids or 3 kids and they have to, and they should be at home, or they want to be at home rather. Aren't there other, for instance, the real joblessness numbers instead of what we're given as a percentage? And I say, what if people knew that represented hundreds of thousands or millions of Americans who are out of work or dispirited and no longer looking for jobs? If these were the numbers that were put in front of us and it's 17 million this or, 7 million people out of work instead of 4.2%, right? I don't know what 4.2%, but when you ask somebody and you get a 7 million figure, or you add how many people dropped out in the last 30 days or 12 months ago, and you come up to 17 million, and that's still not the total number of people out of work. So is GDP and the stock market or whatever they feed us, is that really a reflection of the health of our economy?
No, they're very separate. Overall, an economist, I'm not. I look at it, but again, I do focus on the jobs. I do focus on the workforce more. And what the stock market does is wild, especially recently. You announce a layoff and the stocks go up.
Yeah, isn't that lovely?
Like, I know. So
have a party.
It is. It really is. You had some announcements this week, some different earnings calls, and they beat the earnings or they just barely missed, and the stock goes down 12%. And then layoffs happen, and they're just like, yay. It's so bizarre, so we do have a discrepancy between, what we see between the stock market. Yes, the stock market looks great most days, unless we have some major political announcement, and everything just falls to the wayside for a day. But overall, it is not the same thing of actually what's happening. especially when you mention, middle class America or just America in general, the consumer, the worker, the real lives that are affected, it doesn't match at all. And, we are going to keep seeing this increase in disparity between the stock market, the economy, and, whether you call it the GDP or just whatever, the lives that are affected, completely different, sides of the coin here, because we are seeing people struggling to find jobs. I mean, we're at 1 in 4 Americans have been jobless for 27 plus weeks. And yet we have a 4.3% unemployment rate. No, come on.
What does that mean?
That's not real. And, so we're struggling to find jobs, yet the stock market goes up. And then we have, the economists going, no, everything looks good. Everything looks rosy. We just, cut 25 basis points, yesterday with the Fed. And, everybody thinks that it's going to increase in jobs. And right now I'm like, absolutely not. Historically, yes, it was a nice catalyst to, allow companies to borrow cheaper again, and it just worked, and the economy kind of thrived on some of that. But right now, with what companies are doing, we are absolutely not seeing that 1-1 comparison to say, yes, the stock market, the economy is doing well. Oh, and everybody has a job. It does not exist. Right now, you cannot have both sides showing,
because the models have all changed. Success for a business is no longer that they've provided America, which means to me, Americans, jobs, and that there's some job security. My grandpa started as a welder in a tanker factory in Warren, Pennsylvania. And I think he worked there 30 years. He rose up from a welder, and he was in management, and I don't know if he got a gold watch. I doubt it, because I don't have that. But he got, he had a lovely life, a respectable, honorable life. And he had job security, and he gave everything to the company. That no longer exists. Companies hire wildly and then slash 2 years or 6 months later, and they are completely disinterested in the lives that they're affecting. Let me read 2 posts, and then we're going to get to Amazon. That's where I want to go. And I also want to look at that intriguing post you made about Mexico. But I want to read these 2 posts. You said holy, period. You didn't say holy. Corporate America, thank you, is failing a generation that should be at its peak. Bullet points. Nearly 1 in 4 Gen Xers laid off over the past decade are still, all caps, out of work. 1 in 4 Gen Xers. Almost half say they earn less than coworkers decades younger. Over 1 in 5 get sidelined, skipped for every key project that normally would build careers. Close to 1 in 6 are passed over for promotions they deserve. Gen X feels the weight. Wake up. This needs to change. What are you saying there? What needs to change?
Companies, everything that they're doing, and this isn't just a cultural thing, like company culture or the toxic concepts. What is happening with the way companies are structured, with the way they're running? I mean, HR, I'm not a fan. Anybody that reads my stuff knows I'm not a fan. They're running amok.
Yes.
And, so many, I go to HR conferences just to hear what they're saying. And, they're sitting there going, oh, we want a seat at the table. I'm like, no, you don't know how to run a company. You don't know how to run a corporate. You are a very different person.
They want a seat at the table.
They want a seat at the table. And this is why we're seeing some of these HROs and the CPOs really coming out.
HROs. I didn't even know that existed. That's a new thing-ish.
Yep, chief HR officer. I'm like, okay.
Go back to your office and, get me a coffee on the way back. Okay. So right. What's happening with Gen X?
Overall, what we are seeing, what we saw the last couple of years, and everybody blames, boomers for everything what they do. And it's like, okay, that's one thing. But what we are seeing with companies is that they are letting go of Gen X more and more and more. And, I am a Gen X. And, so we are seeing that. And couple of years ago, I was still dealing with some clients that I'd worked with for years, and they were like, I'm 43, I'm 45, I'm not going to get another job. I'm like, sure, of course you are. But what was happening at that same exact time that I now see, companies are really focusing on hiring just some of the younger generation because it's cheaper, because it's easier. And, I'm not talking about STEM grads or, college grads coming out because they are having a rough time. But companies did start realizing that, well, we can hire the late 20s, early 30s, and they're cheaper because they're more junior in their career.
The humanity is gone, right? I mean, I have people working for me that have worked for, 1997 is when we founded our company, WorldNetDaily. I have people that we've hired that same year still working for me 30 years later. Because when we have ever let go of people in this company, even people that were let go for cause, it's like a difficult thing. And I mean, for us, because there's humanity and love thy neighbor and do good and be righteous. And this is just that American workers, do you think that this is affected, though, by the H-1B? We're not going to go down that rabbit hole, right, because I don't want to focus on it. But do you think that this offshoring and temporary worker visa or visa workers have affected that? Because, back in 1999, when we went through Y2K and all of that, when they started the real shift of bringing in cheap labor, because they got the drug of cheap labor in, and now it's no longer cheap labor only. Now it's like people making $200,000-$300,000, $400,000. But nevertheless, that's 25 years on. We have been seeing this change where the labor market is the 8 million people in the world. The job market for Americans, as I say, I'm an American. I want to work for an American company in America. I'm not going to India, China, or France to get a job. I have to compete for the limited number of jobs available within the borders of my country against a labor market that is the entire world. And that has drastically changed it. Do you think that when you bring in 15,000 people from India and 5,000 people from China and wherever else you're getting them, that this sort of distances you from, there's no patriotism, love of country, and love of your fellow countrymen? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you have that. It's funny. Jensen Huang just spoke recently and saying, no, I'm going to keep focusing on, the visa programs because that's how he got his start here. And, and he was just like, no, we still have this case where, people want that American dream. And I understand that and I understand merit, but the optics are, and the reality is that Americans are being displaced, whether through outsourcing, through visa, through offshoring, nearshoring, whatever. Americans are being displaced. So what about American dream? What about that as we grow up? Like
I kind of thought that was because the word America was in there. I just kind of thought we had first dibs.
Right, exactly. That's exactly it. My father also worked at the same company for 30 years. And, so it is a case of, what happened to loyalty? I mean, job movement right now, I think the average time you spend at a company, if you're lucky and you're not laid off in, one of their big mass callings, is like 3.4 years.
Oh my gosh. You can't even get to know each other in that time. I mean, you're just...
Right. Exactly. So, and you have to look at that. Okay, let's go back 3.4 years. Let's just say it's that. I think it's actually a lot less right now. Even back in like 2017, 2018, it was 2 years for a lot of people. So, let's just go back. I mean, that was after the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. So you're dealing with a whole company that has changed since that happened, and corporates have changed massively on how they manage people, how they deal with layoffs. I mean, now you just get an email and you get locked out. I mean, it's insane. So look, and then going back years before, if you are dealing with somebody that is a millennial or, a Gen Xer, even going back in time is different. So like we've had all of these multiple changes where corporates they're just flying by the seat of their pants on what's happening. And, and Americans are trying to go, hey, what do we do? How do we apply? What's going on? Are there going to be jobs available for me? Why are you posting things in the newspaper so we can't see stuff? It's really frustrating, and it's frustrating to look at. And, when I dive into the data and I look at the different charts and I go back in history on, whatever company I'm looking at, and then this can be anybody from, the Fortune 500 to the Mag 7 to just the smaller companies. I can pull them all up, look at their work history, and you just see it tank. Like late 2022, late 2023, tanked for American jobs. And I'm talking like at a peak, let's just say 1 to 10, and maybe you were at like 8 to 10 at like the peak right there, right after the pandemic when they overhired, let's be honest. But, even we had a lot of jobs. Americans were working. And I would say about mid 2023, it dropped to maybe like a 2.
A 2 what?
Like that, like a 2. Like if you're on a 1 to 10 and 10 peak of jobs for Americans after pandemic, and now we're like at a 2.
You have another post here. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You said WTF exclamation point. Hiring just hit the lowest level since 2009. Only 204, well, let's round it, 205,000 hires so far in 2025. That's a 58% collapse year over year, worse than anything since the financial crisis. The data's out there. No one's ready to admit what it means. No data equals no panic, right? Well, I'm panicking. I mean, I have sleepless nights over this kind of stuff and a broken heart because I think of it's the humanity and it's the inhumanity of it all. What are you attributing this to? I do not believe, and by the way, I think that we all kind of expected, well, I know who I voted for. I haven't asked you. But when I voted for President Donald Trump, I knew that he would get blamed for anything you could possibly throw at him from the previous 4 years and the previous 20 years. Or you could, 25 years, go back to 2000. I don't believe that this has to do with tariffs, which I'm wholeheartedly for. I don't believe it has to do with anything that Trump is doing right now. I think that this is something that has to do with corporate America, offshoring, and I do believe it still has to do with importing workers to the United States, even if it's not as bad as the jobs that we're exporting. What do you say about that? What's causing this collapse?
Corporates, because, and this is why I coined the term the corporate revolution. Everybody thinks about the revolution, the people rise up. Well, we are at a stage where the corporates are rising up. They're getting away with whatever they want. Whether you're looking at these outrageous earnings. I mean, what? NVIDIA just hit $5 billion as a market cap.
I saw that today. And I said I was on the phone when that popped up on my TV. And I said, this is the problem. That's one of the things that was, grinding at me why I asked that first question. I thought, NVIDIA hits $5 trillion. What does that mean to Americans? Isn't it wonderful that NVIDIA hit $5 trillion? I don't care. I care what my neighbor is earning. I care what small town America that doesn't even have, a little downtown left anymore. That's who I care about. But anyway, I'm sorry. I will occasionally go off on a rant like that. Tell me about this. Continue telling me about the 58% collapse. And is Donald Trump going to be blamed for this? And then I'll tell you what, we're going to go to offshoring after I start talking to you about what can we do, or maybe we'll keep that. Tell me about that 58%. Is it Donald Trump's fault?
It is a combination of what's happening. This is not, Trump's fault. This is not the administration as a whole. This is not Biden's fault. This is not any administration's fault, because we have to look at this from a global standpoint. Now, I do focus a lot on American jobs, but when you do look outside of that, and corporations are global. I mean, you're talking multinational companies. They don't just sell to America. They don't just employ Americans. They are everywhere. And, when you look at other countries across the globe, they're having the same problem, which means this is not a political thing. This is not administrative. So yes, there are going to be all kinds of people blaming Trump. There's going to be all kinds of people blaming Biden. You can do whatever you want. But at the end of the day, this comes down to what corporates are doing. And corporates are getting away with it. And whether it's governments that are, you can go down conspiracy loops all day long to say, oh, well, governments are working with corporates to make a buck and do whatever, make deals. Yes, of course, I'm sure that's happening. But at the end of the day, corporates are the reason for what's happening. And we are seeing this, especially in Germany, the UK, really across Europe as well. Australia is starting to feel the punch with, everything, Canada as well. So we have a lot of issues with employment, and it all goes back to corporates at the end of the day.
Okay, you just mentioned 4 countries. And just off the top of my head, Germany, of course, is inundated with migrants in the last 10 years. So they're flooding their labor market, just as we're flooding our labor market here, even though we're offshoring as well. They're flooding their labor market, and they also went to zero carbon footprint or whatever their standard was. So and I know we could go further into that, but Germany has that case. The UK is in this tiny little island, allowed in last year 1 million migrants. That's more than the last, 1,000 years combined that they allowed in. So if they have a glutted labor market, I could see that it might have something to do with the immigration as well. Australia, I'm not sure about. You mentioned one other country. What was it? Canada. Canada, in the last, I don't know when they started doing this under Trudeau, they opened their doors and they said, everybody come here, no holds barred. We're going to drop all of our standards and just come on in. Okay, so each one of your examples, and Australia, I know, is doing really the same thing. So when we say it's corporate, isn't it also unfettered immigration and flooding the labor pool?
Yeah, we have that as well. And I think that's the thing that just mind boggles me the most. When you're looking at, Germany, let's just look at Germany, for instance, their industrial, their industrial industry has laid off it's like 130,000 this year, or announced cuts. It's not all this year, but it's going down, the next couple of years. They're like, oh yeah, when you're having VW laying off 30,000 over the next couple of years. Well, that affects all these other companies as well. It's not just that one. So you look at that and you look at the optics and go, okay, if this is happening, and again, this is what takes me back to the corporates and maybe what they're dealing with the governments, and we do see all the deals going on.
Yeah, we do know that's happening.
This is happening everywhere. So it really feels like it's being driven. And I can go down a lot of paths here, but just bringing in think about when we started having DEI as a big push, right? That really aligns well with, when you look at World Economic Forum, really making that big push on hiring, on immigration, on what's going on.
Global migration, zero borders, right? It's just, and that's India's plan. India wants recycling or cycled migration, where they send people over, they bring them back to India to build up India, then they send more over, take American jobs, stick jobs elsewhere, bring them back. They want no borders, no restrictions whatsoever. That's a WEF, but India is and UN, of course.
Yep. And so we are seeing that, across the board. That's why I said it's not, anybody can blame any political leader, whatever, but it's not their fault in particular. It is not, that is not where it comes down to. It is down to corporations. It comes down to the boards. Perhaps it may not just be the CEOs, although I'd say a lot of the CEOs are a little bit, they got their hands in a lot of different, baskets there, and taking what they can. And I get it. There's always going to be deals. There's always going to be things done.
But don't you think you're saying there's only 204,939 hires so far in 2025? That was October 13th. It's gone up a couple since then. And to me, this must be our segue to offshoring, because there's several things going on here. As integrated as I am in the conversation with the worker visas and the student OPT chain that continues, I see that a lot of times they're throwing out this AI and robotics and blaming that for the loss of jobs, the layoffs or the lack of growth in hiring, et cetera, while they're still bringing in foreigners to do American jobs, and they are American jobs, or to take American jobs. I've seen it as kind of this gaslighting thing. It's a PR strategy, and it's just to keep us stupid. And we can blame AI. Well, you can't fire AI or vote for AI. You can't throttle AI. It's there, right? So now, so AI's to blame and robotics are to blame. So that means no human being or corporation gets in trouble. But then on the other hand, what you do see is that robotics is being used by Amazon. And we can go to your big piece. Very, very fascinating. Tell us about the couple of posts that you've made or articles that you've made on your Substack, which, by the way, you should go to. What is your Substack title called?
Yeah, insiderreport.com, and you'll get
and
it all.
What are you on X? What is your handle there?
The Job Chick. The Job Chick.
The Job Chick. I follow you there, actually, and I'm on your Substack. So go to the Job Chick, at the Job Chick, and go to, say it again. I've got it up here. I could go look.
Insider Edge Report.
Insider Edge. Sorry. I'm never going to remember that. But Job Chick is really memorable. So you wrote these articles on Amazon. There's a memo or a plan that was unearthed or released. And so give us the breakdown on that.
Yeah. So, let's jump into this. You mentioned, AI being blamed for everything. 2023, everything was blamed on overhiring. 2024, companies blamed restructuring, and they just needed to do. 2025 has been the year of AI. So this really falls into where Amazon is focusing, in particular, okay, a couple of years ago, they had 750,000 robots working in warehouses. Yes, that displaced work, obviously. Earlier this year, they announced they had 1 million. Okay, so that's another 250,000. And each robot, I think, overall, and they haven't been super clear. I mean, obviously, they're not going to be. But it sounds like most robots can do the work of about 4 people. So let's look at that displacement. And it's not all in the U.S., but what they just announced, was it last week or the week before? I can't remember. It's been a busy month. They announced that they basically are going to be bringing another 600,000 robots by 2033. The interesting wording that they brought up is that it was going to replace U.S. workers. They did not say workers. They did not say global teams or anything like that. They specifically used the word U.S. workers. That should worry the heck out of anybody that works.
The fact that a corporate, an American corporation, despite the fact that it's a global monopoly, can utter those words and think it's okay, just as I forget the name of the CEO of Microsoft when he said they were talking about layoffs, and he said, "Oh, not India." That came out of your mouth. That came out of your mouth. When the Overton window has shifted so much for corporate America that they can make those announcements and they think it's perfectly okay, and they're getting away with it. So I guess they're right. So they're good. So the 600,000 jobs are going to be cut over.
Replaced. Yeah.
Replaced.
That's the wording. So whatever that looks like, they're not being super specific on whether they're going to have, layoffs to that magnitude. And of course, this is over years. I mean, you're talking 2033. They did mention by 2027, their words, about 160,000 robots will be in place. So let's just look. I mean, that's 2 years from now, barely, especially if it's like by January 2027. 160,000 people replaced. That does sound like a lot of layoffs. That's going to be layoffs. It's going to be attrition. It's going to be any kind of discharge from the company. Now, I'll be watching that in all of the workforce models just to see how they're letting them go, what's going on. But for Amazon, it's worrying because, not to like bring on the H-1B or anything, but they have, when you're looking at H-1B, their number is so small in comparison to their offshoring. So, we add that into the mix and what they're focusing on. It's like 40 times more offshore jobs than it is H-1Bs. So again, H-1Bs is a distraction. They're just trying to have us argue about things that are whatever, and now we just had, the layoffs that have just been announced. I've been talking about them since June, July. I called them back then, said they were coming this fall. By December, they're happening. I think we're still going to see more. With AWS through December, the intel I have looks like another 10% in certain departments by December. And that's kind of more the higher level teams in Bedrock and things like that. But, there's a lot of people. The first announcements were that it's going to be about 30,000, up to 30,000 layoffs, right? And, I would say
all those layoffs can't be replaced by robots, right? I mean, because if they're in, who knows? I mean, maybe they've got a robot in front of I don't.
They're not all warehouse jobs, that's for sure. So this is a lot of white collar jobs. And that is big concern. I mean, middle class America is ceasing to exist as it did 5-10 years ago. And
that wasn't even, think about how things have changed, because since we brought China in the WTO, and since we just said, or since we were told, and many people did not believe it because it was a lie, is that this is good for America. We're going to make so much money selling to this huge population in China. So when we close down 80, 90,000 factories in small and rural America, and when we offshore 5 million plus jobs to China, and I know there are other countries there as well, it's all going to be good for us. So that blue collar, and then of course we know Mexico, another horrendous situation. And now India. That was bad enough. And they said, look, you remember this. Every time some new, story comes out, they say they just need to learn to code. Do you remember that? Learn to code. And I remember thinking about that. This is back, I think, when I was in California 3 decades ago. And I was thinking, wait a minute, so the guy in the factory has been doing this for 15 years, say, he's going to go learn to code. He just got his first cell phone, right? Or whatever, he's going to go learn to code. Now they are offshoring and offshoring, and they're outsourcing here in America to foreigners. What do we learn now? How to pick strawberries? Because originally we were told Americans will clean bathrooms. They won't pick strawberries. They won't, work in a meat packing. So go into, and now what jobs are left other than the government? Is that why the government is such a huge proportion of our employment structure now, or jobs?
It's shrinking for sure. I think kudos to Trump for doing that, because it was just too much. And, I'm not a big fan of, mid-level managers, which is a lot of the government jobs that were cut. So let's put it, that way. But,
But back to the white collar being offshored. I think that is, what does happen? Okay, be a forecaster. Look in the crystal ball and say, what does this mean if it continues unabated to our economy and to Americans? The offshoring.
We are already at the point now where there are more job openings, and I say that in air quotes because I don't believe they're all real. We have more job openings, less job openings than we do have, people looking. And so we are struggling with what is going on this is going to keep going. We have the H-1B 100,000 visa fee, right? So like when
But this
when
is
new
one time. It's like,
this is a one-time thing. This
big
is
deal.
it's peanuts to companies. So this is not going to change anything.
And they're just going to go, just so everybody recognizes this, they're going to L1s now and other forms of, because there's so much fraud in it that they will lie, cheat, and defraud on in any one of the visas, because we have proof of that.
Many loopholes. So many loopholes. And, so companies are going to look at that. But, at the end of the day, companies are there to keep their shareholders happy, to make sure the margins look good, make sure revenue looks good. And they're going to go for the cheapest possible, source of workers. Whether that's going to be automation and AI, whether that's going to be nearshoring, offshoring, whatever, they're going to keep doing that. What we are seeing heavily right now is the outsourcing companies just going, okay, we figured out all these loopholes. Let's go.
Yeah.
And so they are going to utilize that. What we are going to see with, American jobs, we're going to keep shrinking. 2026 does not look pretty. There's a couple industries.
But Amanda, it's okay. When you're saying this, I'm kind of putting myself, I'm in actually thinking this myself. But if I were listening to this, I'm thinking, wait, this is called suicide. This is going down the road. It may be a different issue, specifically than England and Ireland and Germany and France and Austria. It may be a different issue because it is. We have that issue, but that's not what we're talking about here. Where does it end? With collapse? Because, to me, it is a collapse is going to come where there are more people, so many people out of jobs, on welfare, on drugs. Because, look, I don't care who you are right now. You lose your job, you lose your home. I just posted to somebody who said, my house is going up to sale, will be sold within 4 months. Corporate America doesn't care. They were a coder or something. They were in, I think, the tech industry. I said, I am so sorry. That's all I could say, of course, but I wanted to acknowledge it. When you lost it all and you're in a little apartment because you can't afford to pay your mortgage anymore, and you get depressed and you get on drugs and you get divorced and your wife's working 3 jobs and you're working, I don't know, ditch digging, I don't know what, cleaning bathrooms. When you get to that point, you're talking about depression, suicide, children are at risk in families like that, drug abuse, alcohol addiction and abuse, all of these cascading events, events and also situations. And then, of course, you've got people on welfare and food stamps. We have 42 million, I didn't know that, 42 million people on SNAP, and a bunch of them are foreigners, but 42 million people on SNAP benefit. So where are we going? I know you're not an economist, but this looks like doom and gloom to me.
It is, and everybody always goes, oh, Amanda, you're so doom and gloom. I'm like, no, I'm just being a realist, because you can see it and you can watch it happen quarters ahead of time. So yeah, a collapse. Yes, that's quite possible. We're not going to not have jobs. I'm not at that point. AI is not that clever yet, but it is going to displace a lot more people. But at the end of the day, companies, there are going to be certain countries that have a lot of jobs. It's not going to be Americans. And I am solely worried about that because, it is a case. We have all these young people going to college, getting their degree, learning to code, 9 kids, they're all adults now. But, I'm so glad I didn't tell them to learn to code, because I would be so just kicking myself at this point. But, it is really worrying for any parents. As a mom, I'm just like, what does this look like?
And I'm sure you'll be a grandma. I've got 6 grandkids, 7 grandkids.
Yeah,
6.
I am. I have 2 and 1 on the way.
6.
So yeah, it is really worrying to see what happens. There's a lot of people, and I've heard some other people, economists, talking about, are we going to have an uprising? Because at what point do Americans stay so displaced, so without a job, that their unemployment runs out?
Or underemployment, or they're working for peanuts at part-time. Right. Do you know that with the unemployment statistics, that they count somebody who's working just a part-time job as employed? That they're technically, they want a full-time job, They need a full-time job. They're looking for a full-time job, and they've got a job for 20 hours a week, and they're employed. They're not, that's ludicrous.
I know. They're not even counted as that. That's not living life. Not. I don't care if you live in small town America, which is much of the country. That is not living. You cannot survive on. So, where is that stopgap? And, to me, looking at everything, looking at the data, looking at what companies are doing, we have got to stop what corporations are doing. And I'm not big for regulation like that. But something has to give.
We talked a little bit about Amazon. Amazon. When I say that word, I feel guilty ever buying anything from Amazon because, it seems to me that the model with Amazon is you put hundreds or thousands of companies out of business because they can't compete with your monopoly power. You put distributors out of business. You allow little Chinese companies to sell directly to Americans anymore. They don't have to sell their goods to purchasers and to distributors here in America. All of those people are unemployed. Amazon expands. Now they sell you a dishwasher and install it for you. And so they get to the point where now, okay, we rule the world. And now we're going to start cutting back. And where are they going to cut? It's America. I mean, that's my assessment of it, that they've eviscerated malls. I don't have any statistics to back up what I'm saying there about how many companies have gone out of business because of Amazon. It's just my spidey sense or maybe my common sense that tells me that that's the case. And so they get big like this. They bring in tons of foreigners to work for them and they offshore. And now they start cutting back and it's going to be Americans and they're going to say it's robotics. This kind of thing can only go on so long. So we've got robotics, we've got AI, and we've got offshoring, and we've got, the visa workers kind of a thing. Where does it end? And you mentioned, is there going to be an uprising? They're talking in England that there may be a civil war. I know that Rasmussen reported that there's 40% of Americans think that we may end up in a civil war. Don't quote me on that number. When your back is up against the wall and you've got nothing left to lose because they took it all from you, they're causing the violence that they will blame on people who've become desperate eventually. Do you think that might happen?
It very well could, because like you mentioned, like I mentioned, companies are just getting away with it. They're just moving ahead. Unless there's some big plan that we have not been told about. And why would you want?
The magic pill, the wand that is going to solve all this. We didn't tell you we wanted it to be a really big surprise for you, but you're all good. We're going to be down to 1% unemployment, and that means real unemployment, not the fake numbers that we give you. What about this? I know you're not a policy expert. You don't write legislation and all this, but my proposal's been that they've been getting away with this since at least 2000 with offshoring. And now, like you're talking about the corporate revolution, you're putting a name to it. The corporate revolution, to me, what your definition is, they don't care about America. They just care about the bottom line. And if that means offshoring to India and China, Mexico and elsewhere, so be it. The problem with that is that Amazon, as a matter of fact, I was looking at these numbers earlier, that Amazon sells like anywhere between like $377 billion, that might have been last year's numbers, and $438 billion to Americans, and the whole rest of the world is $143 billion or thereabouts. So the model is, we want your money. We want to sell to you, take your money. We just don't want to hire you and give you, a solid job opportunity and job security.
Yeah, they are. Americans want their jobs back. At the end of the day, that's what they want. And, companies don't care right now. And there is a big discussion right now. And I get asked this every single day. I'll get DMs or just messages on my X post just going, well, who do they think is going to buy everything when we don't have a job? And
that was my last point. Like they're gutting their entire consumer base.
Yeah.
Their customers.
Yeah. Which just makes me go, is there that bigger plan that there's something that they just aren't telling people, but it doesn't make sense.
You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. You'll own nothing and be happy, right? We'll just get to rent, toasters, as they said. The only solution that I have, or the core solution is this, that American multinational corporations, which are the greatest offenders here, the offshoring, forget visas for now. The offshoring, that they should, I'll just say it, double the corporate tax rate. I am so sick of hearing an idea of like, okay, somebody's going to reshore one factory or reshore one office worth of coders or something. No. You offshore. Okay, caveat, if you're a hotel chain, obviously you're offshored. There would have to be carve-outs because hotels in France, they hire French scullery maids. That's a joke. French people. But anyway, that all other corporations that are offshoring their accounting, their tax preparation, their customer service, their tech support, their manufacturing, that is any manufacturing that's coming back to the United States, all of those things, if they are working with United States consumers, that they're double tax rate, at least double their corporate tax rate. And it's got to just, what do you think about that?
Yeah, something has to be done. We are at that point where something has to be done. We are never going to go back to what the life cycle of careers was before. We're well past that point. Yeah. Companies are well past that. But yeah, tax the heck out of them. Make it hurt a little bit more, the worrying part is that I think even if you did some kind of like stupid 100% tax or whatever, it's still fine. They're still going to make trillions. And, you don't
even think that would affect them at all? It wouldn't affect them, so they'd reshore?
I don't think so. The infrastructure needed for that is too great. And look at Apple back when all the tariff stuff was talking, and I'm for tariffs as well, but they're like, this is hard. I don't know how we're going to do this. Yes, if we brought everything back in, all American-based companies were American only, yeah, maybe it's not going to happen. They're not all going to be like,
what about
okay,
when Apple sells those hundreds of millions of iPhones in India? I don't think so. I don't care how big their population is. They're an impoverished country. There's just a facade for, whatever, when a president goes to visit and a corporate executive. So, yeah, of course they're going to hire Indians to talk to Indians in India about tech support and customer service. But we've got to have regulation that brings back, by the way, we're also offshoring our data. We're offshoring our financial data, our medical data. We have, and India is one of the most insecure, if that's the proper word, countries in the world because of corruption. That it's off the charts. It's like nobody's compared to India, maybe Somalia.
I think, something I think that could work, you bring in companies and you allow them to, like you mentioned, you buy in India, you sell in India, you have Indian workers there, net new operations. And we do see some companies that really focus on that. Tesla, for one, is actually really good at that. They don't offshore American jobs so much. I'm actually impressed. There's a few companies out there that deal with net new operations. Yeah, I know. It's until you get into that workforce data.
Tell me a little bit more about that, because of course I've heard only bad things and I was so hopeful about the Elon thing, and then, he was gone and all that stuff we won't go into, but I know, I remember that post where he said he was going to blankety blank blank and basically go to war against anybody who tries to end H-1B. And I'm saying, okay, I guess now the richest man in the world is like at war with me, though he doesn't know I exist, of course. But we know where he was on H-1B. I always thought, well, we could convince Elon. My philosophy for Elon was, I think he's patriotic. I think he is not connecting the dots properly. And but somebody else says you're such a Pollyanna about that. I was hoping we could convince him. But now you're giving me a little insight. Tell me what you want to say about Tesla.
Yeah, Tesla is interesting that he is about H-1Bs. And like I said, it can work, but it's abused. So, and let's just leave it at that. It's abused. If the program does not work these days, merit is merit. I think that's great. And, if there's somebody that can take a company to the next level to help humanity, then yes, we need to hire them. But where it's at is not that. But what I do see with Tesla with regards to their workforce, when they set up in India or in China or wherever, they're different locations. They do net new operations, means they hire there. They're not displacing American jobs. We're not all of a sudden going, oh, we're laying off this whole team and we're going to go hire in India.
Oh, I see what you mean by net new. But are they planning on building their vehicles in India and then sending them back here?
I don't, he's got different locations. I mean, I think there's some in Mexico as well, but, there's different areas. But, I think one of the things he was actually trying to focus on is building, Teslas in India. And I think he was working with Modi on that, but I don't know where that's at this point. But from a workforce standpoint, there are companies, and Tesla is one of them, where they do focus on net new operations. They build there, they have their operations there, and they sell there. Yes, can some of those get shipped to another country? Yeah, absolutely, because, you're talking about regional. But they do focus on that. We have a lot of plants here in the U.S. where
not laying people off here and then hiring there.
Just hiring they are.
Well, that's better than what the rest are doing.
They will have some. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
They're not strictly they don't have their halos on, and they're not perfect angels with that. But overall, they're one of the better companies, and that shocked me. That actually shocked me through that. And when I find companies like that, and it's very hard to look at how much they're outsourcing or offshoring or nearshoring, because companies don't have to provide that information.
Don't you think that's part of my solution? I just want to be Tsarina of America for just 1 year, 12 months. And trust me, honey, you'd be out of a job because it'd all be American jobs by the time. There's nothing new to report here. Nothing new going on. But one of my other planks is that reporting that they have to give, and that there are massive penalties, including if you're lying, even jail time for not reporting the number of workers and outsourced workers, offshore or inshore or onshore, that they're going to migrants or any kind of outsourcing, any kind, because we all know that outsourcing long ago stopped being an American company, hired an American outsourcing company, and hired Americans through that company. No, it's only American companies hiring foreign companies that are here in the United States to hire foreigners. That's what it is now. What about reporting? Do you think that would scale it back if they were forced on their IRS forms to give a complete public declaration of how many they're hiring?
Yeah, if you're going to be this arena of jobs for America, let me be the auditor for it, because I have all the promise me you hire me for that role. Because yes, exactly. If companies had to report their headcount, if they had to report the exact numbers, they're outsourcing, they're offshoring, they're nearshoring, whatever they're doing, if they had to provide that, you know what we would have? We would know exactly how many people are employed. We would know exactly how many people are unemployed. And right now, we just have these stupid surveys.
Isn't it interesting that as I spend hours thinking on these things and writing on stuff and typing and everything, and I think, it's so interesting that there are always these numbers and these regulations that literally they admit, the Office of Management Budget, or I'm not sure which office it is, that they cannot count the number of regulations, right? They cannot. It's impossible to ever know the true number of regulations that are required to be, that have been passed or instituted. But the very things, Amanda, that would give Americans and even Congress, because I think Congress people are incredibly ignorant of these things. I think that they believe what the lobbyists tell them and what's in the headlines. They don't know more. I've had people on my podcast and I've said, but did you know that 1.7 million STEM workers are out of work while they are still bringing in American STEM workers, graduates, are out of work? What? They don't know this stuff. They can't keep up with it. And it's, by the way, they're deliberately obscured. So if they had to, why is it this is the one thing that doesn't get reported? I want to know, from 2000 to 2025, the name and address of every factory that was closed and the operations had to be sent over because they had to in the market over to China or Vietnam or wherever they sent it to. I want to know those. Why wouldn't we know exactly how many factories were and how many were in Podunk, Iowa? That's a fact. Why would that be a hard thing for when a company files their income tax or their tax forms or whatever, that they say, and we closed this factory in this city and 322 people were let go?
It should happen. It should happen. Funny, with my background, just dealing with, so many executives and CEOs, I don't typically blame CEOs in general for what's happening because I don't think they know. I've helped so many and they don't know the whole gubbins of what's going on in their company. I know everything. When you're talking, you got like 1.5 million workers, Andy Jassy, CEO of Amazon, does not know every little facet of what's going on, how people are getting laid off or whatever. So I don't typically blame the CEOs. I don't like what they say afterwards, but that's PR, that's optics. They really should fix that. But when you are looking at this is why this is the WF. This is boards. This is a focus. And yes, things change. They know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what they're focusing on. Report the numbers. Then we know.
And the government should require it. Look, I remember this story that Elon Musk told at some point during the campaign, I think it was, and he said, here I am in Florida, and we had a bunch of water that was spilled or poured out onto, I guess the launching pad area where his rockets are going up and or being tested. And they get a notification from some regulatory agency that they're fining us because of a regulation, because of wastewater or not that it was waste, but I mean water that had been spilled on or poured deliberately on this tarmac or whatever, launch pad. And he said, we're in Florida. Like, we're in marshland. Are they really worried about water? This regulation was an irrelevancy. We didn't even know. And they said, you cannot launch another rocket until you pay this $150,000 fine. Now, to them, of course, that one fine doesn't sink Elon Musk's company, but it's indicative of what the circumstances. So they've got that regulation, but they don't demand transparency and give you the form and say, file this OS form. It's the offshoring form, and you better be accurate on the numbers that you're reporting to us, and the closures, and the off and the layoff, and the H-1Bs. And what about banning H-1B or any kind of visa employment if they are found to be violators of the law?
Yeah. It's simple to do. The very fact that I can look at the workforce data that I have, and of course, companies are not giving it to me, but I can still figure out the exact
How do
numbers
you do
of
that?
layoffs.
That's a mystery to me, because when you're giving these numbers and you're forecasting, you're saying they're going to do these layoffs, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, how is she doing that? How do you forecast? Because it's hard to get their numbers on how many they employ. They hide stuff.
It is. And that's why I focus on certain industries more so. So like everybody's like, oh, what about this company? I'm like, I don't know. That's going to take me a couple of days. I don't know. But here's what I can give you basics. I like to focus on aviation. I focus a little bit on oil. I focus on some defense and just some areas that interest me, fintech as well. But, it is a case of really looking at what's going on with the workforce. How are they hiring? How are they having exits? What are the exits? Are the exits discharging? Are they performance related? And then when you see companies go, oh yeah, here's our PR narrative or our earnings going, oh, this is what we're focusing on. And if they call it AI or something, and I'm going to point blank go look at the company and go, oh, really? You're doing AI, you're doing automation, then why did you just lay off all your engineers? And so you have to look at everything, because when companies do give out this narrative, shareholders have to go, look, we're gonna make all this money. Nestle just did this. Talking about $3 billion nation. They do not have that setup at all. So yes, it might be their focus, but considering they're talking about over the next few years, they're going to have that happen. You can't bring in a workforce like that. You can also, there's nothing that shows that they're doing this massive outsourcing or offshoring. So this is going to have to be like an internal thing with Nestle. It doesn't exist in the workforce. I have data up to date. My data, will kind of come in within a couple of weeks. So, my October stuff, I'll get it finished, the second week of November. So, but looking at all the shrinkage of what's going on with these companies, and they're like, oh, we're gonna focus on this. We're gonna focus on this. I'm like, no, you're not. That's just a lie. It makes shareholders happy.
We already know it's that we can't believe any of this. I want to ask you, Amanda, because I know I'm keeping you over what I had scheduled you for. And I found this so intriguing. You said, rumor has it, ... McDonald's is moving all white collar recruiting to Mexico City, and layoffs are happening. There's something very interesting, ... and not in a good way, ... going on, or I could say ellipsis, but whatever, going on with corporates and Mexico City right now. Are you saying this is beyond McDonald's? What is McDonald's doing? Now do we have some new thing to worry about? Mexico City? I thought we had to worry about Mumbai and Chennai, and what's the deal?
Nearshoring is a big thing too. It's not talked about a lot, but nearshoring is anything that's closer to the country that's involving. So whether you're in Europe or you're here, whatever countries are closer, there's a lot of nearshoring that happens in Poland, that takes jobs away from Germany or France, for instance. So Mexico City is a big place. Now, you have to look at this all. And again, you could go on so many rabbit holes with this one. But with all of the stuff that went on with the tariffs and fighting between the US and Mexico on what's going to happen, and companies moving and nearshoring, we'll call it nearshoring specifically, to Mexico City, what's going on? I get a lot of intel from people, which is interesting because I can, I take all of it with a grain of salt. And then some things I'm like, wait a minute, I know this other piece, and I go look it up to go verify something that matches with the data and the models that I have. And, I have a lot of people talking about that companies. There was somebody that actually just messaged me recently on my Signal that said, I just got, offboarded. I got laid off, and I got offboarded by somebody in Mexico City. What is, you're like humanity. Like, what is that?
Somebody calls you from Mexico City and lays you off in, Manhattan or Cedarville.
So I have some of this intel coming in, and I've had it from quite a few people independently messaging me. I can see the presence in Mexico City with McDonald's. So there's something going on, but it's not just them. There's a lot of companies. It's easy. They are, we are, let's put it this way, and not that I'm, against what's happening with the deportation or whatever with, that's a whole nother story. But we are having a lot of people that are going back to Mexico that are fluent in English. So now these companies are going, cool, we have somebody that's bilingual and that can deal with. So you're dealing with the customer service side. So everything that used to happen,
and I'm all for, I'm very pro deportation. The numbers really are of illegals in the United States estimated. The real number is probably 40 to 50 million. And that's a real number. I mean, some people have died off from the 80s or whatever, but anyway, that's too many illegals in the United States, and it's a perpetuation that is a very dangerous thing. I'm all for anyone who's going back home to whatever country is south of the border, Mexico, of course, first and foremost. Now they've got their English skills. Great. You're just a more valuable employee. However, I take issue with this whole cool word nearshoring. I remember thinking, okay, let me see if I'm going to put I'm an American hat on for a moment. And my job has just been offshored to China, India, or it's being nearshored to Mexico or Canada. Oh, good. I'm so glad it's nearshored. What a victory for me. I've lost my job, but at least it's the Canadians and the Mexicans that have gotten it. And, because they're our neighbors, and love thy neighbor, I guess, is what we should be thinking about there. When people are, when corporations are talking about nearshoring, like they're leaving China. But isn't it interesting that they're able to leave China and go to Vietnam? Like that, like we've been told I have been understanding for 25 years. Well, once they've moved over there and they've built factories and they've got whole systems, you can't just pick up these huge operations and move them back. And I'm thinking, yeah, but you can send them to any other foreign country, just not back to America. So we're headed for civil war, civil unrest, a major economic turn down. I don't think I worry about Trump being blamed for this, not because I worry about the man and his self-esteem or anything like that, but I do not want the Mamdanis of the world to be able to drive more young people to socialism, because the errors and the strategies and models of corporate America are now coming home to roost. The fruits or the fruits of it are coming home to roost in America during this economic downturn. Biden would be forgiven for anything by all of the left. Trump will not be. But what I'm thinking is that Trump's economic advisors should be seeing this. Are they? Is the Department of Labor actually processing what's going to be happening with this offshoring?
A fun fact, the Department of Labor follows me on X, so I really hope they're paying attention to what I'm writing. They just started following me about 2 months ago, and I'm just like, good, utilize this information, contact me, let's talk about this, because, you hear different, secretaries or whatever, talk about it, and they have no idea. They have no idea what's really going on. There's a total disconnect, and I get you don't want to scare everybody, but it is worrying, and I stand by my whole thing of it, this being a corporate revolution. But I'm gonna tell you right now, Elizabeth, if some political leader, and I don't care who it is, it can be a congressman, whatever, really stands up to